Welcome everyone. It is 3 p.m. and it's time for the Server Room Show. This is episode 56. Today I will talk about the history of Sun Microsystems, an episode I have always wanted to make, an episode about this. Who knows, maybe even a two-part episode about Sun Microsystems. Unfortunately, when Sun Microsystem was in its height, and later after when things turned bad, after the dot-com bubble, when it exploded in 2000, I was going through elementary and high school, later finally getting my GCSE or high school diploma. Depends on the country where you live, how this thing is called. In 2002, there were a lot of things on my mind at that age of 19, 20 years old, but I can tell you that none of them were Sun Microsystems. And another thing is that even if I had this on my mind, even in other countries which were economically much more fortunate than Hungary, countries which were way more rich and everything, even in those countries, to get acquainted with Sun Microsystems workstations or servers, you had to have really a nice job or connection to something like a university or some research stuff, or having a government, working for a government agency, or a place like where so to say money was not that much of an issue. Why I'm telling this? Because these Sun workstations were never cheap. So even if you were in a country which I couldn't say that a country which was poor or something, it is possible that you might not come across of these computers because they were quite expensive back in the day. However, I used computers from a very early age, about from when I was 6 years old. I mentioned this previously, and of course, it was love at first sight. Thanks to that, I have never had to look for another hobby elsewhere ever since. Somehow, at that time in Hungary, I do not recall, like I said, that I've ever heard of Sun workstations or Sun Microsystems at that time, around the 1999, 2000, around those times. Or I've ever seen any of their machines. But the funny thing is that I do remember that I used under Linux back in the day Star Office, which if you know about Star Office, that was a product of Sun Microsystems. Actually, Sun acquired in 1999 Star Division, and later in 2000 they open sourced it and formed the OpenOffice.org foundation, so to say. So actually, this Star Office, what I remember that I used or came across on Linux back in that time, it was indeed in connection with the Sun Microsystems, and that's what Sun open sourced, and that's how we ended up with OpenOffice. As you will see, Sun Microsystems had a lot of contributions to the open source community. There is a long list of things they contributed to the open source world. I think I will leave a kind of like an exhaustive list about this in the show notes if I don't even get into it. We see if it's gonna be a 2-part or a 1-part episode. If we have time to get into those in detail, we see that. It was later in life when I found out more about Sun Microsystems and all the things they brought to the world, the things they stood for, the machines they made, and I learned more and more of their history with time. I also purchased, not even so long ago, quite recently, like year and a half or 2 years, I also purchased the Sun T5220 with an UltraSpark T2 for my home lab, which is from the era of 2007, around November, just years before the acquisition of Sun Microsystems by Oracle, which happened in 2010, January the 27th, and the deal was eventually closed. So this Sun server with this UltraSpark T2 CPU, their own CPU, is one of the latest which you could get with which was still Sun and not Oracle. I really would like to get my hands on a Sun Ultra 45 workstation, which was one of the last ones made by Sun with the Spark processors, but their prices are astronomical on eBay. Every once in a while I try to make a bid to one of those in of course in good condition and in full specs, but they want the money they ask for those is just to remember that these items are they're still powerful and everything, but it's kind of like a niche market, for this old hardware, which kind of limited in the use cases you can do with them, so to say. So I don't know, to drop 1,200 or 1,400 euros or the equivalent of in your local currency on a machine. On a machine which is new one. On an x86 or something, that you can know that for the years ahead you can put Linux on it, Windows on it, whatever you want to put, you can put on it. You can put BSD on it, but with the technology frozen in time, so to say, these Sun Ultra workstations, which have these in the question Sun Ultra 45, which has the older Spark processor in it, so not the processor like my server has. To drop this kind of money on that, I think it would be a bit silly. So I don't know if anyone has one which is waiting for a new home in mint condition, then please get in touch with me by email. You can find the email on the show notes or on the podcast details or on Mastodon. I would also happily take other Sun Ultra, the typical pizza box, to run some of the older 32-bit Solaris or Sun OS operating systems. It would be much more fun than trying them out in QEMU. I will talk about it probably later if I can. But enough of me talking about myself. Let's dive into the history of Sun Microsystems. If you recall me mentioning about Sun Microsystems before, you are probably not mistaken. In the history of BSD episodes, I mentioned Bill Joy to leave BSD behind to go and help found and actually eventually join a new startup called Sun Microsystems. In 1982, Scott McNealy was approached by a fellow Stanford alumnus, Vinod Khosla, to help provide the necessary organizational and business leadership for a new startup called Sun Microsystems. Sun, along with companies such as Apple, Silicon Graphics, Sricom, and Oracle Corporation, was part of a wave of successful startup companies in California's Silicon Valley during the early and mid 1980s. On February the 24th, 1982, Scott McNealy, Andy Bechtolsheim, and Vinod Khosla, or Stanford graduate students, founded Sun Microsystems. Bill Joy of Berkeley, a primary developer of the Berkeley software distribution, joined soon after and is counted as one of the original founders. The name Sun was derived from co-founder Andy Bechtolsheim's original Stanford University Network computer project, which abbreviation was SUN for Stanford University Network. So that's what originally SUN, the name and the acronym stood for. which was a computer project, the Sun workstations. Interesting fact that Sun was profitable from its first quarter in July 1982, which is not a little achievement. In 1984, McNeely took over the CEO role from Khosla, who ultimately would leave the company in 1985. On April the 24th, 2006, McNeely stepped down as CEO after serving in that position for 22 years and turned the job over to Jonathan Schwartz. McNeely is one of the few CEOs of a major corporation to have had a tenure of over 20 years. The initial design for what eventually became Sun's first Unix workstation, the Sun 1, was conceived by Andy Bechtenstein when he was a graduate student at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. Bechtenstein originally designed the Sun workstation for the Stanford University Network Communications project as a personal CAD workstation. It was designed around the Motorola 68000 processor with an advanced memory management unit MMU to support the Unix operating system with virtual memory support. He built the first examples from spare parts obtained from Stanford's Department of Computer Science and from Silicon Valley supply houses. For the first decade of Sun's history, the company positioned its product as technical workstations, competing successfully as a low-cost vendor during the workstation wars of the 1980s. It then shifted its hardware product line to emphasize servers and storage. High-level telecom control systems such as operational support systems service predominantly used Sun equipment, like things to be with telecom control systems like ISPs, I would say, as of today. High-level telecom control systems, yeah. They predominantly used Sun equipment. Sun's initial public offering was in 1986 under the stock symbol SunW for Sun Workstation, later called Sun Worldwide. Funny enough to know that this symbol has changed in 2007 to Java. Sun stated that the brand awareness associated with its Java platform better represented the company's then current strategy. Let's see about the hardware. Sun Microsystems workstations and servers went through a few changes during the years, very similarly like Apple did. Apple did from the Motorola 68K to the PowerPC platform, then to Intel x86, and then just recently switched to the Apple Silicon. Motorola based systems. Initially, they used the Motorola 6800 family-based CPUs through the Sun 1, through Sun 3 computers. The Sun 1 employed a 6800 CPU, the Sun 2 series a 68010, and the Sun 3 series was based on the 68020, with the later Sun 3X using the 68030. By 1983, Sun was known for producing 68K based systems with high quality graphics that were the only computers other than VAX to run for the 2BSD. It licensed the computer design to other manufacturers, which typically used it to build multibus based systems running Unix from Unisoft. Spark-based systems. In 1987, the company began using Spark, RISC processor architecture of its own design in its computer systems, starting with the Sun 4 line. Spark was initially a 32-bit architecture, Spark v7, until the introduction of the Spark v9 architecture in 1995, which added 64-bit extensions. Sun has developed several generations of Spark-based computer systems, including the Spark Station Ultra and Sunblade series of workstations, and the Spark Server, Netra, Enterprise, and Sunfire line of servers. In the early 1990s, the company began to extend its product line to include large-scale symmetric multiprocessing servers, starting with the 4 processors Spark server 600 MP. This was followed by the 8 processor Spark server 1000 and the 20 processor Spark Center 2000, which were based on work done in conjunction with Xerox Spark. In 1995, the company introduced the Sun Ultra series machines that were equipped with the first 64-bit implementation of Spark processors, the Ultra Spark. In the late 1990s, the transformation of product line in favor of large 64-bit SMP systems was accelerated by the acquisition of Cray Business Systems division from Silicon Graphics. Their 32-bit 64 processor Cray Super Service 6400 related to the Spark Center led to the 64-bit Sun Enterprise 10,000 high-end server, otherwise known as Starfire. In September 2004, Sun made available systems with UltraSpark 4, which was the first multi-core Spark processor. It was followed by UltraSpark 4 Plus in September 2005 and its revisions with higher clock speed in 2007. These CPUs were used in the most powerful enterprise-class high-end CC NUMA servers developed by Sun, such as the Sunfire E25K. In November 2005, Sun launched the UltraSpark T1, notable for its ability to concurrently run 32 threads of execution on 8 processor cores. Its intent was to drive more efficient use of CPU resources, which is of particular importance in data centers where there is an increasing need to reduce power and air conditioning demands, much of which comes from the heat generated by CPUs. The T1 was followed in 2007 by the UltraSpark T2, which extended the number of threads per core from 4 to 8. Sun has open sourced the design specifications for both the T1 and the T2 processors via the OpenSpark project. In 2006, Sun ventured into the Blade server high-density rack-mounted systems market with the Sun Blade. It's distinct from the Sun Blade workstation line. In April 2007, Sun released the Spark Enterprise server products, jointly designed by Sun and Fujitsu and based on Fujitsu Spark 64 6 and the later processors. The M-class Spark Enterprise systems include high-end reliability and availability features. Later T-series servers have also been batched Spark Enterprise rather than Sunfire, like for example my T5220 I mentioned with the T2 processor is batched Spark Enterprise and it's not batched Sunfire. That's where mine is from. Actually, the funny is that I mentioned in the beginning of this episode the prices of the Sun Ultra 45 that they ask around 1,200, 1,400 euros. The Sun Enterprise T5220, which is a much more modern rack server than the Sun Ultra 45 workstation. It cost me around 250 euros. I bid for it on eBay half of the asking price, and I was sure it's not gonna be accepted, but then they did. I wish I had the luck with the Sun Ultra 45, but just for you to know what the price difference between I can get a much more powerful and versatile in this sense rack server from Sun from 2007 for a fraction of the cost compared to this very hyped Sun Ultra 45 workstation. Well, one day we're gonna get there. In April 2008, Sun released servers with UltraSpark T2 Plus, which is an SMP-capable version of UltraSpark T2, available in 2 or 4 processor configurations. It was the first cool threads CPU with multiprocessor capability and it made possible to build standard rack-mounted servers that could simultaneously process up to massive 256 CPU threads in hardware, the Sun SPARC Enterprise T5440, which is considered a record in the industry. Since 2010, all further development of Sun machines based on SPARC architecture, including new SPARC T-series servers like the SPARC T3 and T4 chips, is done as part of Oracle Corporation hardware division. x86 based systems. In the late 1980s, Sun also marketed an Intel 8386 based machine, the Sun 386i. This was designed to be a hybrid system running Sun OS, but at the same time supporting DOS applications. This only remained on the market for a brief time. A follow-up of the 486i upgrade was announced, but only a few prototype units were ever manufactured. Sun's brief first foray into the x86 systems ended in the early 1990s, as he decided to concentrate on SPARC and retired the last Motorola systems and 386i products, a move dubbed by McNeely's favorite expression or phrase of putting all the wood behind one arrow or one arrowhead. Even so, Sun kept its hand in the x86 world, as a release of Solaris for PC compatibles began shipping in 1993. In 1997, Sun acquired Diva Inc., followed later by the acquisition of Cobalt Networks in 2000 with the aim of building network appliances, single-function computers meant for customers. Sun also marketed a network computer, a term popularized and eventually trademarked by Oracle. The Java Station was a diskless system designed to run Java applications. Although none of these business initiatives were particularly successful, the Cobalt purchase gave Sun a toehold for its return to the x86 hardware market. In 2002, Sun introduced its first general-purpose x86 system, the LX50, based in part on previous Cobalt system expertise. This was also Sun's first system announced to support Linux as well as Solaris. In 2003, Sun announced a strategic alliance with AMD to produce x86 x64 servers based on AMD's Opteron processors. This was followed shortly by Sun's acquisition of Kialia, a startup founded by original Sun founder Andy Bechtolsheim, which had been focusing on high-performance AMD-based servers. The following year, Sun launched the Opteron-based Sunfire V20Z and V40Z servers and the Java Workstation W1100Z and W2100Z workstations. On the 12th of September 2005, Sun unveiled a new range of Opteron-based servers, the Sunfire X2100 and X4100 and X4200 servers. These were designed from scratch by a team led by Bechtolsheim to address heat and power consumption issues commonly faced in data centers. In July 2006, the Sunfire X4500 and X4600 systems were introduced, extending a line of x64 systems that supported not only Solaris but also Linux and Microsoft Windows. On January 22, 2007, Sun announced a broad strategic alliance with Intel. Intel endorsed Solaris as a mainstream operating system and as its mission-critical Unix for its Xeon-based processor-based systems, and contributed engineering resources to Open Solaris. Sun began using the Intel Xeon processors in its x86 server line, starting with the Sunblade X6250 server module introduced in June 2007. On the 5th of May 2008, AMD announced its Operating System Research Center expanded its focus to include optimization to Sun's OpenSolaris and XVM virtualization products for AMD-based processors. The time is soon gonna run out, but let's continue, and for sure it's gonna be a two-part episode. Let's see if it's not gonna run into a three-part episode. Regarding the software, just to start, although Sun was initially known as a hardware company, its software history began with its founding in 1982. Co-founder Bill Joy was one of the leading Unix developers of the time, having contributed the VI editor, the C shell, and significant work developing TCP/IP and BSD Unix OS. Sun later developed software such as the Java programming language and acquired software such as StarOffice, as I mentioned, VirtualBox, and MySQL. Sun used community-based and open-source licensing of its major technologies and for its support of its products with other open-source technologies. A GNOME-based desktop software called Java Desktop System, originally codenamed Mad Hatter, was distributed for the Solaris operating system and at one point for Linux as well. Sun supported its Java enterprise system, kind of like a middleware stack, on Linux as well. It released the source code for Solaris under the open source common development and distribution license via the Open Solaris community. Sun's positioning includes a commitment to indemnify users of some software from intellectual property disputes concerning that software. It offers support services on a variety of pricing bases, including per employee and per socket. A 2006 report prepared by the EU by UNU Merit stated that Sun was the largest corporate contributor to open source movements in the world. According to this report, Sun's open source contributions exceed the combined total of the next 5 largest commercial contributors. It's a report from 2006. I see that we would run out of time if I continue now to now we can say part 2 to operating systems, Sun OS and Solaris, and actually I will add some more to the show notes regarding those, because now I see that I will have time to talk more about what came into what achievements came in each Sun OS or Solaris releases, what new things they introduced, and what things actually ended up being contributions to open source community. It's gonna be interesting. So when we talk about the operating system aspects on part 2 and the desktop environments used, and I will probably talk about a bit more about the Sun Ultra line of workstations. So see you next Saturday, and stay tuned for part 2 of History of Sun Microsystems.